Good morning, good day, and good evening. Thank you for joining our second MIRI seminar on current affairs, questioning if Russia is back to the grand chessboard by looking into recent developments in four countries, Niger, Azerbaijan, Kosovo, and Gaza. My name is Svetluša Surova, and I'm the founder and senior researcher at Minority Issues Research Institute. And again, I have the honor and pleasure to welcome you all today on behalf of the organizer. We have with us today four experts: Dr. Angela Gapa from California State University, Dr. Nicholas Esitashvili from Georgian Institute of Public Affairs, Dr. Besford Recai from University of Pristina, and Dr. Muhammed Kochak from Ankara Social Sciences University. They all have extensive knowledge of respective countries affected by recent conflicts, and they will try to shed light on these events and explore the extent to which they are part of the Russian geopolitical chess game. I would like to thank the experts for taking their precious time out and making it to this event. Our senior researcher, Dr. Mirsad Krieštorac, will moderate the discussion. Thank you, Mirsad, for leading again the panel and for putting it together. Also, thanks goes to all participants for being present here today. And besides a timely topic, I must emphasize that today we are covering an unbelievable 12 time zones from 6 a.m. in Chico City in California to 6 p.m. in Tbilisi, Georgia. I'm handing the floor now to Mirsad and our experts. Enjoy discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Svetluša, and thank you, everyone. Hello. Whenever in the world you are, wherever you are joining us from. I understand we have people from Africa, from the Caucasus, from the United States, from many places around the globe, which is truly awesome. So the question we would like to shed some light on today is if Russia is back to the grand chessboard. Over the past few months, a little over a year after the latest war in Ukraine started by Russian invasion, we had several significant flashpoints happening in various regions around the world. And we are today to discuss and see how these flashpoints are relating to each other, at least on that dimension of the Russian foreign policy objectives. So today we're going to have a conversation about these four recent international flashpoints with experts from those regions who are well-versed in both local, regional, and international dynamics. So to recap briefly, let's remember that on July 26th, Niger's military overturned the democratically elected president of that African country of the Sahel region, while Russian Wagner paramilitary units were nearby in the neighboring Mali. On September 19th, Azerbaijan moved to take full control of the remaining Nagorno-Karabakh region from the Armenians in the South Caucasus, while Russian troops were monitoring supposed peace between the two sides. On September 24th, more than 30 heavily armed, presumably Serbian men, took over a small village in North Kosovo in the southern Balkans, some 80 miles south of Russia's outpost called Humanitarian Center, which many see as the Russian spy center, if not more. Then on October 7th, the current ongoing war in and around Gaza began, rattling the entire Middle East region with Russian military and paramilitary troops in neighboring Syria. It appears, and I emphasize that it appears, that international community was surprised by the events, while in every case, Russian military and paramilitary forces were stationed nearby, closely observing developments while not getting directly involved. Now it remains to be understood to what extent and how each case is related to Russian foreign policy goals, and our today's experts will help us see that big picture and understand if and how these events could be related. Now, I will also now briefly introduce our panelists so that everybody is more familiar with them. Dr. Angela Gapa is an associate professor of international relations in the Department of Political Science and Criminal Justice at the California State University in Chico. Her research focuses on international relations and war, conflict, and security. She is particularly interested in the resource curse and on the broader implications of non-renewable natural resources on development, democracy, and conflict. Her regional focus is sub-Saharan Africa. Dr. Gapa is originally from Africa herself, and she is well-versed in local African political dynamics and developments. Dr. Nicholas Esitashvili is an affiliated professor at the Georgian Institute of Public Affairs. I would like to say Gruzian Institute of Public Affairs, right, and an invited lecturer at the International School of Economics at BDC State University. He researches international security alliances, and specifically NATO post-Cold War, increasingly society, characteristics of the international system. Dr. Basford Recai is an associate professor of law at the University of Pristina, Hasan Pristina Faculty of Law, in the Department of International Law. Dr. Recai has a hefty resume, and he served in various roles, of which we can mention that he was a senior legal advisor for Constitutional Court of Kosovo. He was also a chief executive officer at the Agency for European Integration. He was senior policy advisor for the Ministry of European Integration, and the same role for Ministry of Foreign Affairs and others. Final panelist for today is Dr. Mohamed Kochak, who is an assistant professor at the Regional Studies Institute of Ankara Social Science University. His research focuses on international security, Russia and Turkey. His most recent book, Turkey's Russian Relations in the 21st Century, Cooperation and Competition Amid Systemic Turbulence, was published last year in 2022. Dr. Kochak is an expert on Turkey's foreign policy as well as Russian policies over the Turkic world and the Middle East. As usual for this type of seminars, we are going to first hear a short introductory presentation by our panelists for up to 10 minutes. Please keep it like that. And then after that, we will open the discussion for your questions and answers. The presentations will be done in a chronological order, meaning the first one which occurred, we'll start with that one and we'll finish with the last one, where we will essentially organize our presentation like from Africa over the Caucasus, followed by the Balkans, and then this presentation will end with the Middle East situation. After that, if anyone from the audience wants to ask a question in person, please raise the hand icon and we will call upon you. Once your microphone is on, please introduce yourself and please tell us where are you joining us from, and then ask your question. Those who cannot join over the microphone for any reason, you're welcome to type in your question in the chat box and we'll try to ask them on your behalf. Again, thank you all for the cooperation. And now let us turn our attention to Dr. Gapa, who is going to elaborate on the changes in Niger and African Sahel region. Dr. Gapa, please take over.
All right, thank you very much. Let me see if I can share my presentation real quick. All right. Right. Okay, so good morning. My name is Angela Gapa. I'm an associate professor of international relations at California State University in Chico, California. My presentation will mainly look at Russia's inroads into the Sahel region. It's better to look at it from the regional perspective because Niger is just one domino in a series of coups that have occurred in this region. So the Sahel region extends from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Red Sea and covers countries like Senegal, Mali, Niger, Chad, Sudan, and Eritrea. Recently, in the last 3 to 4 years, it has gained a new moniker as the coup belt, as it has been host to 8 coups, predominantly in former French colonies. And one stark feature of these coups is that the public sentiment has manifested as, firstly, this anti-Western, anti-French rhetoric that's coupled with a celebration of Russia's presence. You see protests and demonstrations waving Russian flags. So in the wake of Mali's political crisis, which was one of the earlier countries in the Sahel region which experienced a coup, there were reports that junta leaders were trained in Russia, have ties to the Kremlin. The post-coup military prime minister in that country, Chogil Maiga, is a graduate of the Moscow Technical University of Telecommunications and a fervent advocate of closer ties with Russia. So either way you look at it, it's evident that Russia has positioned itself as a torchbearer of anti-Western, particularly anti-French sentiment in the coup belt. Most of Russia's direct engagement in the Sahel region have been through the Wagner Group, which is the Russian state-funded private military company controlled until 2023 by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the former ally of the Russian president. During the Russia-Africa summit, which coincided with the coup in Niger, we saw Vladimir Putin supporting the coup, Prigozhin offering Wagner services should they be needed. So Russia's growing influence in the region through the reestablishment of old ties and the creation of new ones has been perceived as a quest to reestablish the geopolitical gains that the Soviet Union achieved before its collapse in 1989. So my presentation will mainly be focusing on what instruments Russia has been utilizing to exert this influence in the region. What are the potential opportunities and threats of Russian presence in West Africa and the Sahel region? And what do Africans themselves have to say about this? So there are three main questions. So these are the main questions that I'm going to be looking at. And while Putin's Russia has no visible grand plan, it has a pattern of engagement that has been structured around three main goals. The first is to maximize profits through commercial predation by proxies, thus helping to evade Western sanctions against Russia that were imposed as a result of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The second is to disrupt and erode Western influence in Africa. And the third is to strengthen Russia's geopolitical influence within the region. And in order to achieve this, Russia has relied on three main tactics. The first is through information campaigns, or you could call them misinformation campaigns, so propaganda and rhetoric that overinflates historical ties with the region and is particularly aimed at young Sahelian generation. Russia created a Russia-African alternative partnership for economic development with chapters in multiple countries in the Sahel region. Members have appeared at pro-coup protests declaring their support for junta regimes and their hope for partnership with Russia. Russian proxies have also tried to manipulate African public opinion through social media, and also through movies. One such movie is one entitled The Tourist, which was produced in Central African Republic. And in this movie, the Russians are portrayed as good UN peacekeepers and are portrayed as useless and weak, and the French colonialists are viewed as these scheming villains. The movie actually uses local actors and was shot on location in context that would be very relevant to young Sahelians. And in this information campaign, Russia portrays itself as a staunch supporter of African nations, seeking autonomy and sovereignty, emphasizing historical narratives of Cold War solidarity, such as providing education opportunities, military support. And in addition, these efforts have allowed Russia to garner support and votes in the United Nations, all the while diverting attention from criticisms against Putin's aggressive effort on Ukraine. Russia thus is a central agent in sowing resentment against France and other Western powers in the region. The second tactic that Russia has used in the coup belt is to make its presence known through the establishment of protective clientelistic alliances, typically with unaccountable, undemocratically elected leaders. Russia sees instability and conflict as opportunities to sell African combatants in the Sahel region weapons, provide them with military training, military advising, as well as mercenary services through the Wagner Group. Russian weapons sales have actually increased from 500 million to over 2 billion annually in the last decade. So Russia now sees broader, deeper interventions to influence African countries' conflicts, governance, economies, and security architectures, all to facilitate Russian commercial activities and predation. And the third tactic is probably the most obvious. Russia uses networks in which to seek predatory profit, particularly through the extraction of natural resources, without really contributing to the region's economic development. And part of what makes Niger geopolitically important is that they are the 7th largest producer of uranium in the world. Uranium, of course, is utilized in the production of nuclear power as well as nuclear weapons. Niger also has minerals and oil reserves, as well as has a strategic positioning in the fight against Islamic militants that make them even more important to other superpowers like the United States and Russia and China, Europe and China. Within the Coup Belt, gold dominates Mali's natural resource sector. Mali is the 4th largest gold producer in Africa. So the Wagner Group, through its wide portfolio of services in various sectors, has had basically its hand in multiple pots in different mining activities as well as extractive activities within the Sahel region. Here, we see the Wagner Group being the primary proxy seeking trade deals from elites in exchange for security-related services that are to safeguard the people in power, not the security of the countries more broadly. Wagner's business model has included political backing and guidance, information campaigns, logistical support for African clients, under which it receives the rights to exploit the country's main mineral resources. So when explaining such events like the Russian inroads into the Sahel, there tends to be geopolitical bias, a lens that filters every incident through the prism of international grand strategy. So I would like to end this presentation by looking at what some of the local sentiments have been among Africans within the region. So as with any part of the world, there is polarized views in the Sahel region. You have those who are staunch proponents of Russian engagement and influence. Upon the death of Prigozhin, you had tributes celebrating the life of someone who a lot of youth viewed as a hero from saving, the Sahel region from the clutches of French neocolonial grip. You have social media influencers, particularly Natalie Yam, who has been known as the lady from Sochi. So she tweets furiously anti-French rhetoric and pro-Russia rhetoric to her 500,000 followers on Instagram. But also Wagner's activities have included some grave human rights abuses and increased in regional instability. It is therefore not surprising that the worst critics are sometimes only giving their testimony through the veil of anonymity. In one interview, one witness described how Wagner mercenaries had killed civilians, including a village chief hostage who denied knowledge of the whereabouts of rebels. So they accused him of harboring the rebels and shot him. And then in an entire family, including children who were driving in a Land Cruiser that was assumed to belong to rebels, were all killed. Another criticism is from local business leaders in countries around the Sahel region who have described how, due to the broad sectoral portfolio that Wagner has through its foray in mining, in information, in security, in logistics, that is crowded out local businesses out of entire sectors of the economy. So in conclusion, we do see a significant presence of Russia, which clues us into a broader geopolitical strategy, but the ultimate effect is that it is perpetuating views that force the rule of force as opposed to democratic ideals, and endorses corruption over transparency, drains local development, and also supports authoritarian regimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gapa. We now go to caucuses. Dr. Nicholas, please take over.
Thank you so much. Let me share my PowerPoints with you. All right, can you see the PowerPoints?
Yes.
And can you hear me too?
Yes.
Excellent. My name is Nika Esitashvili. First of all, let me express my gratitude for being invited to your event, and my gratitude and respect. Thank you to the audience for taking part in the event, and let's get down to business. So, my name is Nika Esitashvili. I represent a couple of universities, and I work for a National Defense Academy. That's an academy which raises Junkers, Junkers, that is basically military, future military for Georgia. And my research basically tries to understand what Russia tries to do in Caucasus. Basically NATO, Russia, and what this Russia's influence implies for the New World Order, but specifically for Caucasus. And I try to understand it from the theoretical prism of English school, which I call basically a healthy mix of idealism and materialism. That's materialism, that is what basically the power and distribution of power, and then what ideas, norms, and values imply for international relations. So here we have Mearsheimer on the one hand, who suggests that, yeah, materialism, power, and all those things are important. And on the other side, we have, who is this? You might know, this is Schumann, a German guy who became a French representative, yeah? Very strange, yeah? After the World War II, the guy represents France, French prime minister. And would you kind of believe that somebody who is German would be representing France? Would French trust him? Would Jean Monnet trust him? Yeah, Jean Monnet would probably trust him, and he trusted him. So this guy kind of did very fine things for Germany. And this is what I want you to push. Yeah, Russia might be doing bad things, but maybe one day Russia is gonna start good things too, as extreme as it might seem at this moment. Well, English school again, Hadley Bull, Martin White, Barry Buzan. And the theory what I'm pushing you to is regional security complex theory. This regional security complex theory basically suggests that we have Caucasus here that has its own identity. There is Europe, there is Asia, there is Africa, there is South America. And despite the fact that material conditions might be pushing us in one unipolar or uniform condition, there are values, norms, and ideas which might pushing us from homogeneity to this like diverse understanding of the world. And there are different like scholars that, like, for example, you might recall him, Alexander Wendt, a constructivist who kind of like also suggests that we think in more multiverse, like diverse universe way. So again, like to make things a little bit easier, let's get down to like Caucasus. And here, when we think about Caucasus, when we concentrate on Caucasus, it is crucial to mention Russia, who has a claim to the region. So when we think about regions, like we need to understand one important thing, that it's not that Russia is becoming like a country who is laying a claim on Caucasus. Russia sees itself as a country which always was an owner of Caucasus, at least since the 19th century. It is now that Europe or United States are encroaching on Caucasus. And what's happening right now is that it's simply Russia is feeling like vulnerable, at least according to the regional security complex theory. Russia is feeling vulnerable. And unfortunately, if we evaluate the strength of Russia, it's feeling vulnerable vis-a-vis to Turkey, vis-a-vis even to Iran, and vis-a-vis to, of course, Europe and United States. So if we like think about ideas, norms, and values that are being spread in the world, and vis-a-vis to material power, yeah, we'll see that Russia has real like objective reasons to be vulnerable about. So in our classification, there is Turkey, which is an insulator state in Caucasus. Russia is a regional great power. EU and Europe are like those countries which are encroaching on Russia and are making it feel vulnerable. So Turkey, Russia, Russia's region, and countries around it. So regional security complex in which Caucasus is located in a centered region, and the center is like Russia, in which there are countries which are like, imagine like Russia in the center of the region, Caucasus a small part of the region, and then all other countries encroaching on Russia. And there are also 25 million Russians living in that region, regional security complex. And whenever like Putin feels himself a little bit like vulnerable, he uses these Russians as a bait, you know, and claims there are over 25 million Russians living in neighboring states. And according to this Russian government, there is threat to their lives. And I have to protect these people from those foreigners. And like he genuinely feels this, or maybe he does not. We don't really know. There might be really a patriotic sentiment in him, or maybe he uses them as a bait, like to lay like claim to the region which he thinks is his own. So I like encourage you to think in like to try to understand the mindset of Putin or any like ruler of Russia, Yeltsin, or let's go back to like 19th century, like rulers of Russia. The second important organization in Russia's regional security complex is Guam. Guam is Georgia, Ukraine, like Azerbaijan and Moldova. They are challengers of Russia too. These challengers, they have created like an organization that want to actually get rid of Russia. And like they basically are kind of like trying to organize themselves and create like an alliance to make sure that like they dispose of Russia, and Russia sees another threat coming from them.
So when we are talking about Russia's role in the Western Balkans, mainly we are talking about states that have not been able to join the European Union, mainly We are talking about Kosovo, North Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, Serbia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So these are all states that are in the process of integration into the European Union. However, when we are talking about NATO, we are talking only about 3 states that are still in the path of joining NATO, and these are Kosovo, Serbia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And when we are talking about Russia's concrete influence here, and we should first of all take consideration of the overall geopolitical situation and the location of Western Balkans. In this regards, when we see Western Balkans, we see that this piece of land and states that are represented in this geographical position are actually surrounded by Euro-Atlantic member states, which in a way provides a healthy barrier or cushion against Russia's influence. And having under consideration this geopolitical situation, the attention goes then how and what are the means that Russia is influencing and trying to destabilize the region in the Western Balkans. And in this regards, of course, we refer to a state that is within this region that is enabling Russia's influence in the Western Balkans. And this state is Serbia as an independent state, and also Republika Srpska, which is part of or a constituent part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Serbia and Republika Srpska are the main enablers states that are enabling Russia to actually not only attempt but also to materialize its malign influence in the region. This is a very complex relationship. In a way, it's an alliance of convenience between Serbia and Russia, which is also transactional relationship, which includes many aspects in this regards. And we have material military relationships, as well as broader political, geopolitical aspects of it, as well as religious alliance, meaning Orthodox brotherhood and relationships in this regard. How is that translated into concrete actions and malign, I would say, malign actions in the destabilization of the region? Russia is and Serbia are convenient, have a convenient alliance of conveniency, because on one side Russia is upholding Serbia's opposition to Kosovo's independence. And how is it doing is mainly through let's say use or abuse, I would say, of its voting powers, and particularly veto power in the Security Council of the United Nations. And why is this important? Because Kosovo has not been able to join this organization from its independence in 2008, because membership in the UN goes through Security Council, which in this case has to vote under the so-called substantial procedure, and all permanent members of the Security Council has a veto power. So, and Russia has threatened to use this veto power and will block any future membership of Kosovo in the UN, as long as at least we don't have some sort of normalization of relations with Serbia. On the other hand, it's also not the UN, but it uses its influence elsewhere in OSCE and all other international organizations, formal and informal organizations, to block any internationalization or legitimation of Kosovo independent state in international relations. On the other hand, Serbia is enabling Russia's influence in the region, and this is needed badly, at least since Russia has occupied Crimea back in 2014. And why does this is this of helpful for Russia? Is because it wants to draw attention, international attention, from Ukraine, and to create hotspots and to create crisis situations elsewhere, such as in Western Balkans or Gaza, or in the Sahel region, as it was explained earlier by the previous speaker. And so this is purely transactional relationship in this regards, and there is absurdity to as well to this actions. For example, on one hand, Russia opposes Kosovo's independence, but on the other hand tries to take big chunk of territory from a sovereign and independent state, trying to resemble the situation in Kosovo, which is totally nonsense in this regards. To go back to concrete influence, we see several signs of this malign influence in the region, not only in Kosovo, but also in Macedonia, in Montenegro, and as well as in Bosnia and Herzegovina. For example, we saw what we are referring recently as the hybrid activities in Macedonia, in a bid to undermine free and fair elections in Macedonia, as well as to undermine free and fair referendum to join NATO in the North Macedonia, as well as the same situation developed in Montenegro, undermining free and fair elections there, as well as undermining the referendum there to join for Montenegro to join NATO. In Kosovo, we saw of course, Dr. Kriestoras mentioned recent developments, recent crisis in Kosovo, but this influence, Russia's influence, and in a bit to destabilize Kosovo, can be traced back to at least in a more concrete steps in 2015, and this coincides with 2014, right after Russia occupied Crimea in 2014. So from then, Russia tries to inflate crisis in other parts of the world just to shift the world's attention from Ukraine and its actions there. So in 2005, in a very, very symbolic, let's say, gesture, we have a situation where a train, which was covered or labeled by labels stating Kosovo is Serbia and covered in Serbian flag, leaving Moscow station and going through Belgrade and trying to enter Kosovo, which was very symbolic in this way. But of course, we managed to stop it with the help of course, international community and NATO peacekeeping force that is still in Kosovo. And then we have other hybrid activities which culminated in this year. Only at the beginning of the year, we had violent clashes in the northern part of Kosovo, which is adjacent to Serbia, very vulnerable to Serbia's and Russian influence there. And throughout the city, you could see posters and signs of Wagner, of Rush Z insignia that depicts the military sign that the Russian army is using in Ukraine. And later, just recently, we had this terrorist attack where about 100 men, fully armed men, entered Kosovo in violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Kosovo, killed a police officer, and entered a monastery there until they were pushed back by our security forces. This action was totally organized, and there are clear signs that this action was organized by top politicians and military heads of Serbia, especially and particularly we can refer to Alexander Vučić as president of Serbia, but the main, let's say, organizer in this perspective was Alexander Vulin, who's now is former head of Serbian intelligence agency. Alexander Vulin was appointed recently, maybe I think 2 years, even less than 2 years ago, but let's say 2 years ago, he was former Minister of Defense of Serbia, very close ally and friend of Serbian President Alexander Vučić, and he only resigned after the Western pressure due to the latest events in Kosovo. But somehow Alexander Vučić was there is some sort of amnesty for international amnesty for Alexander Vučić in this regard. Alexander Vulin visited only recently, maybe a couple of months ago, Russia, and met with Russian President Putin there. And so I will stop here. Thank you very much. I will be glad to discuss any issues and comments you might have with this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rečaj. And we now go to Dr. Kočak. Dr. Kočak, Middle East dimension. Svetlusha, you want to interject or you?
No, I'm not raising hands. I'm clapping for the speakers.
Okay, clapping. Okay. So Dr. Kočak, please take over. And then after Dr. Kočak, we'll try to have Nika finish the discussion on Caucasus because something went wrong with, I guess, his computer. All right, Dr. Kočak, please take over.
All right, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful actually panel. I'm already learning so much, and I'm really proud to be proud to participate in this panel discussion. So the previous panelists before me already spoke about how Russia actually used several tactics and strategies to kind of destabilize multiple regions, and unfortunately, Middle East is one of them. So I will be trying to discuss the Russia's influence and strategies in the Middle East region, with particular attention to what's happening between Palestine and Israel right now. My name is Muhammed Koçak. I work as assistant professor in Social Sciences University of Ankara in Turkey. I hold a PhD from Florida International University, and I'm focusing on Russian foreign policy and Russia-Turkey relations. So, so when it comes to Russia's relations with the Middle East, I think it resembles. I mean, when we talk about Russia's rising influence in the Middle East, I think the topics and the situation that we are going to discuss will resemble what Russia is doing in all the other regions. So I think what has been missing, or not missing, but not touched upon as much as I would like to see, was that the diminishing influence of the United States and Europe in these regions. I think the Middle East is a wonderful example of this, because in the Middle East we see a diminishing both strategic as well as soft power influence of the United States, because after the Iraqi war and the intervention to Afghanistan, the United States basically throughout the 2010s, especially starting with the Obama administration, kind of figured that, well, you know what, we would not like to get much more involved in these regions. Instead, that had like two reasons. First, it was too costly for them, for the United States, because you invest a lot of it, and all you get was the loss of soft power, millions of people dead, you know, the streets, as well as the governments do not like you anymore. Plus, China was a bigger danger for the United States, so they figured that they deflect all their attentions to China. So fast forward to the process of the Arab Spring. Well, there were like hopes of getting rid of the dictatorship, totalitarian regimes across the Middle East, and, you know, replacing them with popular regimes. So when the flames of the Arab Spring or Arab uprisings reached to Syria, everyone thought that the Assad regime is going to also go away, and you know, this whole regime will be replaced by a rather popular government. However, this didn't occur because Syria was very important for Iran plus Russia. So they intervened, especially the Iranian paramilitary forces helped the Assad regime to basically quell the opposition very violently. So right now, Assad regime basically controls close to like 50 to like 60% of the territory, as well as Damascus and Aleppo. However, in northern Syria, as well as in eastern Syria, the Syrian government does not have much control. So Russia was one of the regional or great powers that has actually intervened in Syria militarily, along with Turkey and Iran. And Russia did this because an opportunity has arisen. Russia figured that, well, just in parentheses, Russia's, I mean, it was already mentioned, but Russia basically aims in its foreign policy strategy, aims two things. First, global instability and global multipolarity. Second, hegemony, or rising Russian influence in multiple regions, be it in the Central Asian Turkic world, be it in the Caucasus or the Middle East or Africa. So Russia uses the similar tactics everywhere, ranging from paramilitary forces, hybrid warfare, or direct military interventions. In contrast to what Russia did in Africa, Russia militarily involved in Syria with its army, with its like ground forces, with its air forces, and with its navy too. Because Russia also has a military base in Hmeimim, which is near the Mediterranean Sea. Russia wants to protect that, and, you know, with a cheap and modest investment, Russia could actually gain a foothold at the heart of the Middle East, at the expense of the Western power, as well as the power of the Syrian people, or the power of the, you know, several regional actors except Iran. So in collaboration with Iran, Russia basically had an air superiority for much of the Syrian territory, and could be a very important stakeholder in the Middle East, in particularly in Levant. So this was very important for several actors. For Turkey, because, you know, Turkey has certain problems with the Kurdish separatists, as well as the militant terrorist groups that has emerged in Syria, and Israel, which is in competition and in violent or cold competition with Iran in the region. So since Syria and Israel has a land connection, Israel was very worried. So let me open another parenthesis here for Israel-Russia relations. Well, Israel and Russia had like trade relations, yes, and 10% of Israelis actually speak Russian and they don't speak much Hebrew. So there is this like cultural and like people-to-people connection here as well. So Israel and Russia has like good relations. However, with Russian forces being in Syria and with the Iranian forces threatening Israel, Russia actually had a chance to cut a deal with Israel whereby Israel would be protected or would be assured that the Iranian paramilitary forces will not pose a military security threat to Israel. So the details of it is that, you know, the Iranian paramilitary forces would be 85 kilometers away from the Israeli border, plus Russia also turned a blind eye to Israelis hitting certain targets within Syria. But in exchange for that, Israel basically did not apply any kind of economic sanctions on Russia, you know, along with its Western partners. Plus, Israel did not provide the requested security. The requested security equipments from Ukraine. So it goes both ways. So when the clashes between Gaza Palestinians and Israelis emerged, Russia was at first hesitant to basically take sides. It just, you know, reiterated its original point, which is that, you know, we are for the two-state solution in Palestine, and we condemn, you know, Hamas terrorism, etc., etc. But when Israel reacted to the attack from the Palestinians in a very violent way, which claimed the lives of more than 10,000 people, most of them are children, and this created a very high outrage, not only in the East, but also in the West. Russia saw an opportunity to basically instrumentalize this growing outrage, to basically just be a champion, quote unquote, in world values, you know, human rights, etc., etc. You know, we now hearing, or we've been hearing from Russian officials more and more about how the US or like Western solutions for Israel do not work, how they basically support Israel and the killing of babies, how Russia is for the human rights, etc., without making any commitment, without like pushing Israel to basically comply with any kind of you know, humanitarian solutions, etc., etc. So again, just like in Syria or like in anywhere else, Russia is making a big investment right now in Palestine by pushing its own narrative regarding human rights, by basically just saying, look, we as Russians, you know, we are great powers, and you know, the solutions that are offered by the West to the conflicts in the world do not work at all, just like it doesn't in between Israel and Palestine. Second, Russia is, you know, by doing that, Russia is also consolidating its influence in the Middle East. And third, and maybe most importantly and imminently, Russia is diverting focus away from what's happening in Ukraine, because just before this whole ordeal has started in Palestine, everyone was talking about the human calamity in Ukraine caused and perpetuated by Russia. But right now, you know, people are basically just becoming a little bit more anxious about clapping for, you know, Western support for Ukraine, because Russia is saying, well, look, the West is hypocrite when it comes to Ukraine and Palestine. So it should be given free hand to what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Well, to conclude again, there are multiple things, multiple investment opportunities for Russia that's happening in Palestine, and Russia is using them within the framework of its strategy to promote global multipolarity and the regional influence for Russia in the Middle East or in elsewhere. Thank you.
So
Okay.
it was an interesting conversation that we heard from all of you, but I noticed few things. And before anybody else, if anyone wants to ask a question, please raise your hand icon or type in your question in a chat, and then we'll ask it for you. Okay, so we have Alejandro. Alejandro, please go ahead, ask your question, and then I'm going to be asking something. Go ahead, Alejandro. If you can turn your microphone.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Professor. Thank you for inviting me to the lecture. I just wanted to say I appreciated everybody's time here. It's all very, very interesting. And I didn't have a question specifically for any particular person, but just anybody who feels free to answer it. How do you people see the evolution of the European Union as far as their stances on defense and mutual defense evolving in the face of what Russia's doing, essentially? I've heard since the beginning of the conflict, a lot of people have been expecting Article 5 to be invoked in some way or another, whether willing or not. And it's very interesting to me that, you know, the conflict is as close to Poland as it is, for example, and there aren't any steps being taken concretely on that level of organization against a potential conflict. So I kind of just wanted your guys' views on that.
Potential expansion of the conflict, or rather just regarding the Ukraine?
Well, specifically hard politics. So in terms of military expansion and in terms of control, essentially.
All right. Okay, so anybody wants to chip in on that? Go ahead, Dr. Kochak.
Yes. Well, essentially, the European Union or Europe does not have its own security organization, but it does have NATO, which is basically where the United States is very influential. Well, actually, we should not be we should not forget that the United States has been very influential also for the foundation of NATO, for the foundation of the EU, which makes actually the relations between Europe and Russia a trans-Atlantic one, meaning the European agency for its security relations between Russia and the EU has not been very high because of the involvement of the United States and the competition or global competition for influence between Russia and the United States. That doesn't mean that Russia's threat of expansion or the expansion or the threat of the expansion of the conflict from Ukraine westwards is only a transatlantic one. It's actually a regional one too. It's actually a regional Eastern European one. But the nature of the security arrangements with regard to the involvement of NATO makes it look like so. So anytime something is happening, the United States is involved and makes it harder for the European Union to resolve the problem regionally with Russia. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that the European Union is not really much of a union, because the Russian threat to Poland is not as high of a threat to say Spain or Netherlands. So they are always in disagreement as to how they have to react to the Russian expansion. So there is that too. So there are like multiple challenges in the European Union's reaction to the apparent Russian expansion or the apparent Russian threat. And Russia is using them. Russia is sowing the seeds of discontent in between Europe, or between Europe and the United States, or within the European countries through funding far right and far left organizations. I think that's the summary of it.
Okay, great. So listen, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Kochak. As I was listening to all of you, I see all of you really avoiding to answer the question that we posed today, right? All of you are basically somewhat, presenting the case around it, but I would love to hear from you. Give us a little more meat, right? As Dr. Breslin will say, stick your, your neck up, forward and tell us, right? Is really, do you think, to what extent Russia is involved in these, places? And obviously, we would need to hear some sort of more substance in terms of why would we think it is, and why would we think it is not. So, Dr. Gapa was talking about interesting things, right? About these regional identities, which essentially somewhat play a role for young Sahelians. She was talking about potentials of Niger, uranium, oil, and talking about gold in Mali, and that anti-colonial kind of sentiment which Russia tries to exploit. But, to what extent do you think Russia is involved directly? Like, is this really just happen and then Russia is next door to it? Or is it Russia involved? And does Russia play actually a role in that thing to satisfy the specific goals?
So my assessment of the situation is that I did not find a lot of evidence to actually show the Russian footprint in a direct manner in the case of the Niger coup. Where there was some direct engagement would be in Mali, where even the coup leaders were seeking out support from Russia. But most of the engagement within the region has been in the Central African Republic, which is just outside of the Sahel region, as well as in Mali. So most of this assessment is where could Russia go with this, and the template that has been set in the Central African Republic and in Mali. So in the Central African Republic, the Wagner Group is actually the presidential guard. They are the ones who provide the logistics for the transportation of the president, for the military logistics within the country. And
so president's safety and security depends
yes,
on
the detail is basically Wagner.
Okay. So maybe, as if I understand what you're saying, so this is how it goes, right? Like, while international community may be surprised about what happened in Nigeria, Russia is not, and that's the extent that we can say, right?
No, Russia is already on top of things. It's already seeing this trend of dissatisfaction, low cost, low standard of living in these areas, a crisis of legitimacy with these leaders who have not been able to provide public goods to the citizens, as well as the grip of French neocolonialism. People, I mean, as we know, the CFA franc is the main currency within West African countries which are francophone. So I think the assessment by Russia is more in understanding the underlying factors that are causing these grievances within the populations, and
So
therefore,
in other words, yeah, there will be another clash with France, right? So there is already somewhat tension between France in Mediterranean, and now there's going to be another between Russia and France in Sahel region.
I would assess that to be the case, except that in both cases with France as well as in Russia, none of them are interested in outright conflict. So it's more of establishing patronage systems which still allow them to get the financial gains as well as the gains of having a leader who's loyal to either one of them. So they just want to have that hand within the pot as opposed to direct engagement. I did not see any evidence to suggest that they would be willing to engage militarily in any of these places, especially in Niger.
Even upon an invitation, because the leader went to Russia afterwards?
Potentially, yes, but from what I have seen from my analysis, it's both Russia and France do not want military engagement. They do not want Niger to disintegrate into a conflict. No.
So that means the thing happened, and it just looks like it's playing more in the Russian court rather than in any other courts, right?
I would say so, yes, correct.
Okay, great. So now let's ask also Dr. Rețai. Dr. Rețai, you did put some allegations here regarding, situation in Kosovo. But I'd like to ask you, right? Okay, so what happened with that story? Somewhat, the story was very much alive, and then it died down. So we don't know really what happened since. Like some people were captured after. Dr. Reçai. Some people were captured. So did any new information came regarding that particular incident, where as you said, almost 100 armed people essentially took over the small town in North Kosovo and that monastery? Do we have any more information? Is there any other kind of things that can maybe point to Russian involvement?
Okay, thank you. So it seems that I'm having trouble with video conferencing. So I will just. Is it okay if I can continue only?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And sorry for that. I think the internet. I'm in my office, and maybe it's Friday after 4 o'clock. They are doing something, maybe some backup or something, because they do it on Fridays, and maybe because of that. So just to relate to your first question, is Russia coming back as a world player, and how that influence is going to be formed and to be asserted? I think that with the situation in Ukraine, we see a Russia that was not in our imagination, actually. We see a state which is a strong state, but it's not a superpower. We see a state that is very isolated in the world. And we see a state that does not stand to resemble what was USSR before that. And when I'm talking about USSR, I'm talking about a superpower that was balancing against the West at that time. So USSR was able to exert influence elsewhere in the world, because it was, in order to be a superpower, you not only have to have military equipment, but you also have to have economic power, as well as other material support. And just not to refer to, I can just refer to Joseph Nye, that you have to have smart power. You have to have hard power and soft power, which I think still currently only US has. And so this can be also seen in Azerbaijan, what happened in Azerbaijan. And a staunch ally of Russia lost its, let's say, control of a territory inside the sovereign state, Nagorno-Karabakh, which was held for many years. Of course, it was illegally from my perspective, and from the perspective of the whole world, but it was a factual situation that was enabled by Russia. And now we see a staunch supporter of an ally of Russia that is leaning towards the West and is accusing Russia of alienating and of actually treating as a traitor of Armenia's cause in this regard. So Russia, although it wishes to be more directly involved in the world, but it doesn't have power, first and foremost, because they are heavily engaged in Ukraine. So their main focus is in Ukraine. So what they are trying to do, and will do in the future, and have done so far, is to incite a crisis situation through other means which are mainly seen as or referred to as hybrid activities. So it's either information-based or financial support or ideological support. And when they have more support local, they need to rely on local support somehow to enable these crisis situations. And this is how they are doing in Western Balkans. This is how they are using Serbia. They are using this alliance of convenience and an alliance of autocrats, because it's interesting that Putin is all allies with Serbia, and because it's Alexander Vučić there, an autocrat, as well as he is somehow in alliance with an EU NATO member, Hungary, with Viktor Orban. So this is how, and Russia is uniting all autocrats and dictators all around the world in order to exert influence through these. So these are like proxy activities, extended arms of Russia in different regions. So in the current situation in Kosovo, yeah, we saw a European Parliament resolution that deplored the events in Kosovo, and also earlier European Parliament resolution stating that Russia is involved through different activities in the Balkans, not only in Kosovo as well, but also as well as in other parts of the Balkans. And so what we saw is resignation of Alexander Vulin as chief of
yeah, but did we, Dr. Recai, do we have any new information? Like some people were captured. That's what the media reported.
Yes, no,
do we have any new information about who the people are? I mean, some concrete evidence, because what we hear mostly allegations. Allegation. Okay, so we need some sort of meat. Do we have some concrete evidence or something specific that we have learned since the conflict from, at least, I assume that authorities have questioned these people who are captured, and so what happened since?
Concrete means is that, I mean, from Russia, you mean?
No, I'm talking about
directly from Russia, and then concretely, we had an unprecedented military buildup in southern Serbia, which is in the border with Kosovo. Thousands of military personnel with heavy armaments stationed around Kosovo, at least from the May or even earlier than that were also triggered international concern about potential invasion by Serbia.
Recai, all these things we have heard already. I'm asking, since that Banjska incident, there were, I think, 4 or 5 or 6, I forgot how many people, how many of these men were captured. Yeah. So do we have any more information about exactly who they were, what they were doing, other than all these things that we have heard from you and from other players, right? That this is probably Russia, that this is probably, right? So that's essentially important. And while Dr. Recai is answering anyone asks a question, we will be happy to I see there is one at least. Go ahead.
No, in this regards, we don't have any, at least I don't have any, I mean, let's say like concrete information, but maybe it's confidential still, because we have 3 people that are under arrest and 3 others were killed in the actions, and maybe the police already has some concrete information about how the whole event unfolded.
Okay, there is an interesting question posted in the chat by Mr. Lazarevsky. If Mr. Lazarevsky wants to ask in person, you're welcome to turn on your microphone. Otherwise, I will read it for you. He's talking about your expose, Dr. Recai's expose on Russian involvement in the incursions and its meddling in the Balkans in general. And he then says that there was a Russian Orthodox priest who was expelled from North Macedonia after being exposed as an agitator on behalf of the Russian Secret Service. So Russian influence in North Macedonia is quite substantial, and it is anchored in the idea of Pan-Slavism and Orthodox Brotherhood. However, something else that I have observed, that's what Lazarevsky says, is that Russia's influence has wanted after Macedonian accession to the NATO. I would like to ask Dr. Echai his take on what he thinks Russia's endgame for the Balkans is. Are the Balkans merely a bargaining chip for Russia, or do you think that Russia sees having a foothold in the Balkans as the geostrategic asset? After all, Russia and Serbia have long-standing historical cultural ties, and that he's thanking for insightful presentation. So what is your comment, Dr. Echai?
Yes, thank you very much. For your comments, Mr. Lazarevsky, as well as, on top of that, the Macedonian authorities have discovered a center of activities which was doing in misinformation. They were involved in cyberspace, in placing misinformation as well as fake news. So, and this base was in, I don't remember right now, but it's in one part, I think in Southeast Macedonia, somewhere there. And they discovered this place, this hub of people working to influence the opinion of the people in Macedonia, but as well as in the region and the world. So again, to go back to your question, I think that I mentioned that in my presentation that we are an enclave within the Euro-Atlantic zone, and I think that Macedonia, Montenegro, and other countries, being NATO members, are quite secure. On top of that, they are buffer zone because they don't. Russia does not have direct link to Macedonia without passing through a NATO member state, which is very good. That provides us very comfortable situation in a way that we can easily, if we are ready to do that, we can quite easily counterbalance those malign influence that is Russia trying to do in the Balkans. I think that Russia knows that, Serbia knows that, and but what they want to do is, Russia wants to do is just to use to abuse with the current situation the tensions between, mainly tensions between Serbia and Kosovo, and tensions within Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they by supporting elites, political elites that are nationalists in their political programs, maybe even propagating Orthodox Brotherhood agendas. We can see that Russia is playing by this Orthodox card because they want to be the main supporter as well as defender of Orthodoxy all around the world. So Russia is using all kinds of relationships and belongings in order to force alliances which are mainly to the benefit of holding President Putin and alike like him in power, maybe at least in Russia, in its near abroad policy as well as elsewhere in the world. Because, but when you see it from the other side, it's very absurd, because when we see the war in Ukraine, we see a, let's say, Orthodox, Jewish, Muslim alliance, if I can refer to that. So I'm very careful about using this term. But so we have a president, we have a mainly Orthodox country, Ukraine, with a president who is the Jewish, and the Minister of Defense who is Muslim, against an Orthodox Muslim alliance. There we have Russia, mainly Orthodox, and the Chechen Republic and Ramzan Kadyrov. So it's the religion is being abused in this just a means in order to achieve some political gains there. So I think that Russia knows that and just tries to shift attention to shift the Western resources and Western attention to other crises in order to achieve its goals in its near abroad, mainly in Ukraine as the main priority, but elsewhere in the world.
Okay, that's great. All right, thank you. So we're going to wrap up now. I just have one question for Nika and one question for Dr. Kochak before we finished. And it is interesting to see that Dr. Recha is essentially saying that Russia is using same geopolitical goals or strategies like Soviet Union, where they're relying on local players to achieve some sort of, ambiguities, where then they have a more role to play globally. So, Dr. Estashvili, let's kind of, this notion that Russia is somehow protector of orthodoxy and, this like that. Well, in the case of Azerbaijan, that falls apart, right? Because it is exactly that Orthodox country have essentially lost, right? And Russia was just observing and doing nothing to prevent the fallout of essentially of the remaining parts of Nagorno-Karabakh, while perhaps I don't know to what extent, but there is a conversation about Israel being involved on the side of Azerbaijan, crucially involved on the side of Azerbaijan, which again makes it difficult to understand even what Dr. Kochak was saying, where Russia and Israel have some sort of mutual agreements, but how the Russia and Israel agreements work in terms of Russia, or rather Israel being directly involved in Azerbaijan, as far as these reports are correct. So now, Dr. Istashvili, what do you think is essentially a new paradigm developing in the Caucasus after the Azerbaijan asserted its control, after the Armenia had to withdraw? What do you think is the next? I mean, I was essentially very much hoping to hear what is happening with Georgia. Yeah, things kind of somehow died down. The Georgia is crucially important for both sides of the Caucasus, but somehow things are very quiet there. So does this, what happened in Azerbaijan, reflects in Georgia? What the Georgian officials think, how they positioning themselves in light of new things that happen in Azerbaijan?
So hi again, and again, pleasure being here. What I'm seeing here, it's not a coincidence that I use regional security complex theory, because Barry Buzan, all the way, were already predicted what's going on in this region about 20 years ago. So if we read their book in 2023, they had already said that Russia would be losing their power. What was gonna be happening is that European Union was gonna be encroaching into Caucasus. Azerbaijan would probably be regaining Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia would be turning again from Russia towards probably European Union or Iran. So probably Caucasus would be turning into a playing region among whom? United States, European Union, Turkey, Iran, playground, and Russia. So Russia is gonna be weakening, and everybody else is gonna be entering the region. So it's becoming a playground, according to them. Russia weakening, everybody else entering into a region. So the region was, according to, again, regional security complex theory, was completely centered on Russia. Russia, a dominant power, everybody else outside of the region, everybody else like outside completely. But now Russia, simply as a weakened power, has to put up with everybody entering region. Imagine already in 2023, Barry Buzan and Ole Weaver, the guys who are representatives of English school and Copenhagen school combined, had written this. And like, so what's gonna happen in the future? Georgia, like again, like we have now the government that pretends to be neutral, yeah, because they pretend to be neutral, yeah. I, by the way, work for this government, and I don't only teach in the like universities, but I work for the government. I'm an academician, so I can talk in this way. So like they say that they are neutral, that's why they don't talk loud against Russia or pro-Europe. They say that they are pro-European or pro-United States, but they don't say it loud, not to make Russia angry or like not to like, you know, be hurt by anybody. So yesterday we got like again like from Europeans, we said that you are like gonna be accepted to European Union, but you have like 9 like conditions to fill in. You are doing really badly. You are gonna be accepted maybe in a few years to European Union, but you still have to fulfill these 9 requirements, which you are really doing badly. So we gotta do all of these things, and we are doing really badly in terms of fulfilling these requirements. Now again, Georgian government is like pretending to be, I want to emphasize it, to be pro-Western and pro-European, not to piss off Russians. We are not fulfilling the requirements. So you see, we are playing this double game.
So you're like, basically waiting to see, right? You're waiting.
We are waiting to see. So what we need to do basically as Georgian people, and we understand this really well, is to get rid of this government and bring on some government with a face which is either pro-European or really pro-Russian, and really choose our side. But I don't know, are we gonna do that? Because in the elections, this government is gonna falsify the elections, or we are gonna bring the government which is like really gonna choose the sides. But because
so if I understand correctly, Nika, that means what happened in Azerbaijan reflects in Georgia. Basically, Georgia is saying, let's kind of hold on and let's kind of pull back and see, you know, whether the European commitment really means anything. And because if it doesn't, then we, like last time when Georgia started or tried to regain the control of its territory, Russia moved in and took more.
You know, I don't think that like people are either smart or not smart. It reflects more that we don't trust the parties who represent us. So we don't trust the ruling party, but we also don't trust the opposition party who is gonna who represents us. But it more does not trust like overall the governing system. We now have a majority governing system, but if we had the multi-party ruling system, yeah, then I think we would like be choosing the parties, yeah, and the coalition governance. And then I think we would undoubtedly be tilting towards Europe and NATO. But now, because we have a majority system, this reflects the things that we are always choosing the party that we really don't like, majority of the government does not like. But because of the majority governance ruling system, we are still choosing the party we don't like, one way or another.
Yeah.
I don't know if I expressed myself correctly, but like
proportional representation will be more representative. Yes. Okay. So Svetlusha, you asked the question about how Georgian status candidate to European Union will affect the further development in the region. And as you hear from Nika, essentially they're talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Before we go to Dr. Kochak, we have a question. Mr. Pavlov or please, you introduce yourself and ask your question if you can. Mykuta, Pablo, I see their hand is raised. Go ahead. Okay, microphone is on. Okay, so maybe like Pablo, your question can be asked afterwards. So Dr. Korczak, right, you mentioned that's quite an interesting thing, that security arrangement that you noted between Russia and Israel about, securing the northern border, right, while essentially holding the ground in Syria. So now this is really a question, like there is a conversation about Israeli involvement in Azerbaijan, which makes Iran very nervous. That also somewhat reflects on Turkey, and certainly, I don't know exactly how Russia looks at that potential involvement in the Caucasus by Israel, whether that will reflect what you think in the current situation in and around Israel and Palestine.
So I think I need to underline a very important point again. I think the point that the Western institutions, be it the European Union or NATO or the United States itself, and their promises and their security commitments are not, bought by the local actors, be it like regional powers, middle powers. They just don't trust the United States or the European Union. So they do not want to put all their eggs in the same, the Western baskets, just like as it is now happening, as my friend Nika has established with Georgia, but also with other countries in the Balkans and in the Middle East, with Turkey, with Israel, with North Macedonia. They just don't want to be out in the cold when Russia is there with all their hard power, with with their security commitments and with their partners. So in this kind of environment where the West is supposed to be there, like overwhelmingly with as a hegemonic power, but in reality it isn't just there and not promising to be there. With the United States is focusing on China and do not want to really take the whole burden of being a gendarmeria forces of the world. Well, this kind of situation actually leaves Russia a room for influence, a cheap influence. Actually, I mean, Russia does not have to be like a Western player, or providing a comprehensive security to the local actors. Russia, I mean, it's important for Russia to be or it is enough for Russia to be a spoiler actor, making sowing seeds of disappointment towards the West, so that Russia maybe may appear as an alternative actor with like small investments. So I think that's an important point. So when we look at all these traces, no, I heard your question and I'm going to come to that. So when we look at all those traces, I think we're asking the wrong question. I mean, whether Russia is like directly involved, whether Russia is doing that. I think the mere truth that we are talking about Russian influence in these regions is enough for Russia, because we are talking about Russian influence. We, whether or not Russia is there, supporting all these actors, are secondarily important, because when we ask these questions, and we are actually it's legitimate for us to be asking these questions, is that we actually subliminally accept that the US and the West is losing power, and Russia is a very important actor, not just in its near abroad, but also in faraway regions. I think this is very important for all the small actors, local actors, states, tribes, or whatever you think of in all the corners of the world. When you ask about the Israel-Azerbaijan connection, Israel and Azerbaijan has like special relations. yes, Azerbaijan-Turkey relations are very good, but you know, Azerbaijan being an ex-Soviet republic, actually has you know, a sizable Jewish community, and you know, there are also a lot of Azerbaijanis in Israel too. So with this connection, I think actually they capitalized on this connection and made certain security and energy agreement with Israel. With that, Israel is providing weapons, you know, be it like unmanned aerial vehicles or like, you know, with Iron Dome and everything to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan providing gas to Israel through through the Baku-Tbilisi Ceyhan oil. Azerbaijan providing oil to Israel, and also Israel providing support to Azerbaijan through the Jewish lobbies in the United States. So they have a very special arrangements. I think it's making wonders for Azerbaijan because it's at a disadvantaged position in the West because of the sizable Armenian diaspora.
Yeah. Okay, so that probably is making Iran nervous, and we are opening new cans and new cans. But I cannot not ask you. So what you're saying essentially is that Russia will like the current conflict in around Gaza to continue? Is that what I understand from what you're saying? Essentially,
I would
they
say
don't want
yes,
that to be
certainly,
resolved because
certainly,
the
yes.
continuing
Yes,
conflict,
because
you know, benefits them.
Because you know, the more conflictual the world is, the better it is for Russia, because when everything is stable, you know, controlled, you know, Russia, an aspiring superpower without the capacity to be so, you know, Russia can't do that. Russia needs to be a spoiler actor, you know, as a secondary power. So being a spoiler, you need conflict. If you know, so in those situations where you cannot, you know, create conflict, and the conflict is actually there, it's good for you because, you know, you do not spend any kind of energy, and there is a conflict, and you know, you push yourself as a stakeholder,
Yes.
as an influential actor. You put like question marks of the Western influence, etc., etc. I think so.
Yeah, many goals achieved. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, people, very much. It was quite an interesting conversation. I hope everybody understands that we had people basically covering 4 continents of the world. Pretty much only, you know, China was missing, right, or India, right? But because there was a report 2 days ago, there was some sort of clashes between India and Pakistan. So we'll see how that will develop. But it was quite an interesting to see this global perspective from all of you. And so, unfortunately, it looks like the news are bad. It looks like this instability will continue, and this instability will essentially cause more expansion of the conflicts because this current hegemon, the United States, is not able to anymore keep things under the control.